Lawyers have read it. What was the least defendable case ever brought to you? Story 1. Worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few crazies a year call in. A guy called in claiming that we stole characters that he created and demanded to be compensated. I calmly asked them to provide more details so I can determine whether this has any merit to it. He states he designed the characters himself and gave them to the well-known actual creator when he was a kid. The creator pawned them off as his own. I asked him when he was born, and it's a good 20 years after these characters were actually created. I asked him to explain this, and he pivots and says he also created some other well-known famous characters and brands. Characters and brands that are not owned by my company. I kindly asked that if he wants to pursue anything to send us something in writing and hang up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research in his own claim, he wasn't going to spend any time writing it up. Never heard from him again. I was 100% sure this was going to be about Itchy and Scratchy. Pretty disappointed with the way it turned out. Story 2. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and infringed by no one. It had 10 means for elements in each patent claim that no one would practice or that weren't supported in the written description. Partners, my bosses, new to patent litigation, sued in the patent anyway using young and experienced, unseasoned attorneys in the firm. 3 years later, after billing the client millions of dollars, every defendant won by proving each claim was either non-infringed or invalid. My employer appealed and billed the client another boatload of money, with a young attorney in charge of the appeal that didn't understand the underlying issues on any level, because he was a former teacher instead of a patent attorney. It was such a bad patent no one would settle at any point in the case. My bosses were blood-sucking trolls. I quit for these and similar parallel reasons. The firm finally imploded. Story 3. Not a lawyer, but my parents had a pretty messy divorce and a custody battle over my sister and I. I was 12, she was 8. Basically, my mom kept her affair secret for 2 years. Then my dad found out, and my mom ran away with my sister and I. Dad was shocked and naturally tried to find us. We were in hiding for about 2 weeks before the cops found us and forced us to do things the legal way. Unfortunately, the court system in my country is extremely biased towards women, so even though my father, with no criminal record, 2 houses which he owned and a stable job, lost the custody battle against my mother, with a criminal record, didn't have anywhere for us to live, and didn't have a job. She had primary custody, so we only got to see our dad every second weekend, which was awful. Sometimes she'd let us go have dinner there during the week, which was nice. It was kind of stupid that she never let us see him, though, because he literally got a house 2 blocks away from us. Literally a 5-minute walk, so he could see us. Stuff was whack for 10 months. Worst 10 months of my life, for sure. My mom was on some pretty hardcore stuff and in the end planned out my father's passing because she wanted him out of our lives because he never stopped fighting for my sister and I. She wanted to break up with her boyfriend, the one she had an affair with, so she had convinced him to end my father, and then she was going to turn him in for doing so. 2 birds with 1 stone. Anyways, they obviously failed, both went to jail, my father finally won full custody. Funny thing was, they were still legally married. In my country, you have to be living separately for 2 years before you can legally divorce, even if one partner had an affair or committed adultery. So my parents were technically married for 3 years after they split, because they hadn't documented their living arrangements, despite it being pretty obvious through the court. Anyways, it's been over 5 years since all that. Still living with my dad, don't speak to my mom, haven't seen or heard of her psycho ex-boyfriend since. Life's good. Story 4. Not a lawyer. I was a jailer and used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured and passed out behind the wheel, parked on the sidewalk, surrounded by a ludicrous amount of guns. His legal defense? He elected to represent himself because he wasn't done being stupid. Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, illegal substances, and felon in possession of a weapon because I've already been convicted of all those charges before. In short, during his jury trial, he admitted to doing it but explained with a smug grin that since he had already done time for the same charges from another case before, that he could not be prosecuted for them ever again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's been in prison for 20 years now. If he'd taken legal counsel, he could have easily cut a deal for 5. Can you imagine if the world was like this? Get arrested and charged for stealing a pack of gum, sentenced to some community service, maybe attend a class on anti-theft. Boom. Total immunity to all theft crimes for life. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but my father got sued by an idiot. My dad was exiting a residence when an idiot dinged into his car, swerved and smacked right onto a palm tree. His car was totaled. The idiot sued my dad, claiming that my dad dinged him and made him lose stability and made him swerve into a palm tree. Naturally, when this goes to trial, my dad's witnesses show up. Witness 1. The guy was driving like a madman and almost ran my girlfriend over. When he wrapped himself around the tree, I went in to rough him up and my dad stopped me. Witness 2. I just look at the street and this idiot driving way faster than he should have, crashing into this guy's car and lampooning himself into a tree. Witness 3 froze and didn't comment anything meaningful. I just saw the idiot's car wrapped in the palm tree. There's also a video of the crash. The idiot dinged my dad on a blind spot while my dad was trying to turn. The idiot's witnesses didn't show up. The case was dismissed for obvious reasons. Psst, guess what? This video is sponsored by none other than me and my awesome crew at Rufus Rugs. We're the masters of creating custom, hand-tufted rugs that truly capture who you are. Whether you're looking to turn one of our intriguing thumbnails into a rug, for purely academic reasons, of course,
or you're eager to transform your room with some epic anime-inspired designs, we can get it done for you. These are all handmade by me and the team from Canada. No dropshipping BS here. Real, handmade custom rugs by me and my friends. Click the first link in the description to learn more.
Story 6. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful case that was pretty miserable. The plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. Plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have terminated it. A quick look at medical records showed that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities, and she returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress, but he did not do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from, not do an organ scan like an OB would, but she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail, but she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy. So he didn't do an ultrasound at all, but she sued whoever provides that healthcare. The jail, maybe? Just a sad case that the hospital won handily. Story 7. Not me, but my dad's lawyer. My dad's ex-wife decided that they weren't getting on with divorce proceedings fast enough and decided to make a move while my dad was at work and we were all at school. So, she locked my little brother in my room, the only one they didn't touch, and called over 40+ people to take whatever she thought was hers. So pretty much everything, including furniture, old music, and pictures from before she was even around, to show up to the house to pick up my little brother and it's empty. I don't know what she thought was going to happen when she possessed many things that were obviously my dad's, like pictures of just me and him or the computer that he bought through his job at Dell. My dad sued her 3 times and won every time. She just got caught laundering money from the summer camp she worked at, and my old Boy Scout troop that her son is, or was now in, screw her. Interestingly enough, my dad just remarried to a district attorney. My dad is now divorcing that district attorney on much better terms this time. Jesus, 3 different times? That must have been so satisfying for his dad, and so embarrassing for the ex-wife. Know what else would be satisfying? If you left a like in this video and subscribed to the channel. Story 8. Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your new bar or restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he was not using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision, something like, you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now the wackadoo received full payment, but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There's a doctrine of law called a material breach of contract, which in a nutshell means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late when full payment had already been made, yes, it is a technical breach of the contract, but no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach. And certainly, no court would let that wackadoo keep the license and the money. So he sued the wackadoo, who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. Wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. Story 9. Guy wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. Guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he had been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he called the city to have them get rid of the mice, but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this, and he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business, and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest and the towed garbage truck. Story 10. An independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later, and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in a residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues at the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. The office is boarded up for non-payment of rent, his house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he paid his insurance up front and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after around 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then, he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and absolutely no regard for the structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shady and his file management so poor that we had basically nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intention of returning for trial. and we'd probably never be paid. Isn't there an extradition treaty with Australia? That whole thing really sucks. I'll bet his daughter doesn't know how bad her dad really is. Story 11. I'm not a lawyer, but my mother was in a lawsuit against her roommate, and the roommate lost horribly. My mother, the nice, kind woman that she was, heard that a family member's mother was going to be homeless. She was a bit crazy, which later turned into really crazy, and wasn't allowed to be on the premises of her daughter's apartment complex for legal reasons. She takes her in and gives her the spare room. My mother worked as a hospice worker and stayed 4 nights a week at her client's home. She told her new roommate, but nothing but verbal consent to stay in her home, so no legal paperwork, no bills under her name, nothing but whatever random mail was sent to the roommate, was told that she could stay, live there rent and bill free as long as she cared for the pets and house while my mom worked. This lady had changed locks, done hard substances, booby-trapped the house, stole items. The list goes on, but I'll cut it there to save a read. Well, my mother tells her she needs to leave and gives her over a month's notice to vacate her property. She did not, and after dozens of 911 calls and a legal notice to vacate after several trips to the local sheriff's office for help, as the roommate had squatter rights, we managed to get her out and move on to court as she had several of us between telling her to leave and her leaving. She represents herself, and my mother, myself, and my then-girlfriend with my mother's lawyer arrived. The lady was offered first speaking, and she tried to lay out this massive defense. I have a copy of the lease, as well as several other documents making it illegal to remove me from this home. As well, I went to file charges against them for B&E, as well as verbal assault. The judge looks to us and we give them our statements, as well as all the videos we had recorded of us entering and confronting the woman on this issue, and she was the only one screaming, cursing, and so on. As well, my mother and I, along with the home's actual owner, provide the actual lease. I signed on as a co-signer, though I did not live in the house, and all of which failed to have the roommate's signature on it. The charges on us were dropped almost immediately. She was charged with squatting, forging legal documents, slander, and a few others I can't recall offhand. We were granted restraining orders against her. As well, she had to pay all the fines of the court and spend just over a year in jail. Story 12. There hasn't been an actual case yet, but I have an interesting story. My mother works at a private school, specializing in additional help for kids with special needs, and there's a kid who she said a few months ago needed some type of medication, as he was causing too much trouble for his class teacher. The school said that, specifically without this medication, he's too disruptive and would need to be sent to another school that specializes in special needs children. They got the medication and everything was fine for several months. The parents then say to the people supplying their funding for this extra support, they still pay a lot of money every year for this kid to attend the school, but they get some government funding because their kid has special needs. That they were told their kid had to change school because the class couldn't handle him, and that they would need another $20,000 a year for the difference in school fees by sending him to a specialized school. Of course, this gets fed back to the school and then my mother. She talks to the head teacher and the kid's class teacher, who both say that the kid has been fine since taking this medication. This has been several months, remember, and neither of them had said anything about him having to move school since before the medication. My mother has to have a meeting with the government bursars, which originally would have just been them and the head teacher. But the kid's father insisted that he must be present and that my mother was not allowed to speak to the bursars. Of course, my mother says that's ridiculous, so he plans a private meeting to discuss the matter before they discuss it in front of the bursars, and then brings a lawyer to this meeting and says my mother isn't allowed to talk to the head teacher or class teacher about his kid without this lawyer having a record of what they say. My mother has since told me that the lawyer says it is unreasonable to do this, and that as it is, there's no actual case for this parent to get the additional funds. She, the lawyer, is just there to catch a slip-up in what my mother says. Story 13. Criminal defense attorney here. I'd say 85% or so of my clients are, without question, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The keys for their cases are determining 1. Whether I can have any evidence excluded, e.g. via the 4th or 5th Amendment, in which case they could still potentially win a trial, and 2. What the best possible plea deal could be. It would be hard to name one case that was not defendable because every week or so I get a new client who was at fault in an accident, totaled their car, and then had a .15 or higher blood alcohol concentration. I do have one story from my civil litigation days about a pro se defendant who was representing himself without an attorney after being sued, who wanted a trial in an eviction action. In my first ever civil trial, I was representing the plaintiff who wanted to evict the defendant from her property for non-payment of rent. After presenting my case, the judge asked the defendant to present his evidence. The defendant replied, "Huh?" The judge said, "Now is your turn to present your case." The defendant said, "I don't understand." The judge leans over the bench and asks, "Why are you here?" The defendant said, "Oh, yeah, right." The defendant then went on a 30-minute tangent, literally 30 minutes, about all sorts of things like how he only parks his car so he can see where he's going when he pulls out because that was taught when he was in the military, and about how he has a whole ton of friends and they love making barbecue. I could have objected to relevance, which is actually a pretty rare opportunity, but the more he talked, the more the judge disliked him. After 30 minutes, the judge finally asked, "About the rent?" The defendant says, "Oh yeah, I'm not trying to debate that I didn't pay for it." That's how I won my first civil trial. Easy win. We take those. I don't know what they were expecting from someone who had no idea what they were talking about. Story 14. I was in prison with a guy, he was on the rack next to me, who was serving 6 years for what I believe was a 6th, quite possibly higher, OVI. He was operating an illegal taxi and had crashed into a telephone pole. When he was taken to the hospital, he was tested and came up positive for grass and this guy spent every minute of every day telling everyone around him how it was unfair, writing and sending in motion after motion, clogging up the court with his BS. His argument was that since his levels were below the level of impairment for a driver, not a thing as far as I know anyway, his lawyer should have presented this at trial. He was also suing his lawyer for bad representation. His blood work levels were not used as evidence against him, at least from what I saw. But the kicker is, he tested positive for substance use and crashed his car. I'm not a lawyer, but pretty sure that's exactly what the law says you can't do. Man, the guy was irritating. Story 15. I can't answer the question, so I'm going to answer the most defensible, which is a horrible case for the plaintiff that somehow got brought. The dude was pouring concrete at a work site, showed up, backed in, set up, poured the concrete, and saw that there were muddy ruts. Gets told to pull forward and clean up, didn't ask for clarification about where. Feels that it's unsafe but doesn't say anything to anyone else. E.g., is that safe? Can I do it somewhere with fewer ruts? You mind if I just do it over there? And just does it. Trips and falls and hurts his leg. Sues the property owner. And another one. Guy gets hired by my guy to do some yard work and stuff. All goes well. My guy and the plaintiff talk about maybe doing some work on the shingles and the roof. Never really agreed to the price, when it will be done, etc. Plaintiff shows up while my guy's at the movies. Takes a ladder out of his garage, climbs up, falls off, and hurts himself. Sues my guy for not giving him a safe space to work or fall prevention gear. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy What's Your Most Embarrassing Doctor's Office Story? Story 4 made me cringe. See you in that video.